Okay, welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on when you're watching this. Let's take you through what we're going to aim to achieve in this video. So this video, you might be watching all of it or you might be just watching bits of it. So the four things we're going to cover in this video are to multiply out single brackets, multiply out double brackets, that means getting rid of the brackets, and then factorising, which means to put back into brackets, both single brackets and double brackets. So those are the four things we're going to aim to achieve. We've sent you a document to go with this lesson, and the first thing I'd like you to do is to look at the starter activity where you've got to practice multiplying out some single brackets, and hopefully that's revision. And so we'd like you to have a go at those 6 questions. They look something like that. And once you've done that, unpause the video and we'll talk you through what we did when we did them and look out for any mistakes. So pause the video now, have a go at these 6 questions. Okay, welcome back. So let's have a look. This is what you should have done. So let's hope, and we've deliberately picked these 6 questions. They get harder as they go through and they pick out some of the things that you most likely have got wrong. So as we go through, if you've got something wrong, pause the video, make some notes to make sure that you know what it is that you should have done that went wrong. So firstly, what does this mean? Well, this means 3 multiplied by everything that's in this bracket. So it means I need to do 3 times this bit, and I need to do 3 times this bit at the end. And this is the bit that often people forget. So if something goes wrong, it will be that you forgot to multiply this bit by 3. So 3 times x, I think I can write as 3x. That's nicer than 3 times x. And then 3 times 2 is 6. And actually everything's positive, so this is going to be a plus sign. And just for later, when I'm going to have some negative numbers, I'm just going to remind myself of the rules. If I do a positive number and I times it by a positive number, I think I get a positive number. If I do a positive number and I times it by a negative number, I think I get a negative number. If I do a negative number and I times it by a positive number, then I get a negative number, and a negative multiplied by another negative number will give me a positive. And we might need those later on, so I'll just leave them up here so we can refer to them. Okay? So let's look at number 2, which does have a negative number in. So good job we've got these rules. We'll have a look at those to make sure we get it right. So first up, this says to do -5 and times it by x. So this is like a negative number times a positive number. Negative times positive gives me a negative. So I know I'm going to have a negative at the front there. Then I just do 5 times x, which is 5x. Now when I do this second bit, I treat this like it's -2. Okay, so in my head I think of it as -2, even though in the bracket it looks like take away 2, they can act in the same way. So I'm going to treat that in my head like -2. So this becomes -5 times -2. So when I do a negative times a negative, this tells me I get a positive. So I'm going to put a plus sign in here. Again, that's something that might have gone wrong when you did it, so make sure you look out for that. And then 5 times 2, because I've done all the minus signs, gives me 10. One at the bottom, this one tells me to do 3 lots of 5x. Well, what is 3 lots of 5x? Well, it's like 5x and 5x and another 5x, so I think altogether I've got 15x. Or if you prefer, you can think of that in this way. You can do 3 times 5 first, that makes the 15, and then just put the x on at the end. Next, I've got to do 3, and I've got to multiply it by -3. Okay, so in my head, I'm thinking of this like +3 and -3. So when I do a positive multiplied by negative, I think I get a negative, so I'll need a minus sign here. 3 times 3 makes 9. Number 4, fairly similar to the last one. So when I do 6 times 5x, I'm going to do 6 times 5 is 30, and then x. Then the second bit, 6 times 3 is 18, and then the y. Now, number 5, I might need to think a bit more carefully. So up the top here, I'm just going to remind myself that when I do x times x, we write that as x squared. So whenever I do x times x, I can write that as x squared. Now here, I've also got a 2 out the front as well. So really what this means is 2 times x, and then I'm going to times it by x again. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 times x times x. Well, I just talked about x times x, that's x squared. We decided that up here. So I'm going to leave the 2 at the front and then write x squared. And then this bit says 2x times 5. Well, 2x times 5 is 10x. And this is like a positive number multiplied by a negative number. Positive times negative gives me negative. And lastly, even harder. So how do I do 4x times 5x? Well, I think the easiest way to do it is to deal with the numbers first. So do 4 times 5, first of all, which is 20. And then I'm doing x times x, which is x squared. Same thing at the other end. I'm going to do the 4 times the 2 first. And then I've got an x multiplied by a y. So I could write x times y, but it's neater and better to write xy. So that's what I'm going to do. So if you needed to stop and make notes on any of that and change what you've done and write down what I said that made it different, please pause the video and do that now. And if not, we're going to move on and look at what happens when I try and multiply out 2 brackets. So this time I've got 2 sets of brackets. Now, if you've done this before, you might be able to, you've probably got your own method of doing it. There are various methods of doing it. So I'm going to give you 2 of them today, but then no means all of them. So if you've looked it up somewhere else or done it with somebody else, you might have done it slightly differently. We should all get to the same answer though. So option number 1 is that we draw what we call a lobster claw. So I draw a big lobster claw on the top, connecting this one here to this one and then back to this one, and then a mini lobster claw on the bottom so that it looks like a lobster claw. Okay, connecting these 2. And then basically anything connected by a line gets multiplied together. We are multiplying these 2 brackets, so everything that's connected by a line needs to get multiplied together. Now the alternative is, if you don't like that, sometimes we do it this way, and those multiplication grids that you've used at primary school to multiply numbers, this is the same kind of thing. We put this first bracket here, x and 2, and I'm going to write it as positive 2 because it's x plus 2, and I'm going to write x and positive 3. And again, it's a multiplication grid, so I'm just going to put a times sign up there to remind me that I am multiplying. Now, whichever one you're doing, we now need to go and do the multiplying. So I'm going to work off the lobster claw first. And what I tend to do with the lobster claw is every time I've done one of the claws, I tick it off so I know which ones I've done and I don't lose track. So I'm going to start on the inside at the top here. I'm going to do this line here. So this line here connects an x, and I'm multiplying. So when I do x times x, I get x squared. Okay, so I've just done this one, x multiplied by x. Next up I'm going on this one, so give it a little tick to remind me I've done it. Now I am multiplying, remember, I know there's a plus sign here and that will get in your head sometimes, so remember I'm always multiplying. So this is x multiplied by positive 3. Think of it as positive 3, it might help. So when I multiply x by positive 3, I get positive 3x. Now I'm going to this inside one at the bottom, and I'm going to do positive 2 multiplied by x, which I think gives me positive 2x. And lastly, don't forget I'm multiplying, because this is where it often goes wrong and people start adding. I am multiplying positive 2 by positive 3. So I think when I do 2 times 3, I get positive 6. Okay, now if you're doing it in this grid method over here, then it just works like those multiplication grids that we did when we did numbers at primary school. So in this box here, I get the result of multiplying these 2 things together. So when I do x times x, I think I get x squared. When I do x multiplied by positive 2, I think I get positive 2x. And I'm going to write the positive sign as well. That'll be helpful later when I'm trying to tidy it up. Likewise in here, I'm going to x multiplied by positive 3, not adding 3, I'm doing x multiplied by positive 3, so I think I get positive 3x. And here I'm doing positive 3 times positive 2, which I think gives me positive 6. Now if you compare what just turned up in this box here, it does match exactly what turned up in that box there. So it doesn't matter which of these 2 methods you use the one that you prefer. Now, I've done quite a lot of work, but I'm not quite finished yet. The last thing I've got to do is just tidy it up a little bit. If you look at these 2 terms in the middle, they've both got x's in them. So if I've written plus 3x plus 2x, then actually I could tidy that up a bit, because if I've got 3x plus another 2x altogether, I think I've got 5x. So the last thing I do is just tidy that up and put those 2 x's in the middle together to make plus 5x. Likewise, if I was doing it on the grid, you can just combine these 2 here, look, the 3x and the 2x. It's the same thing. And then I would rewrite it at the end, x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay, so let's do another one a little bit harder because it's got a minus sign in it. So again, either I'm going to do the lobster claw, big claw on the top, little claw on the bottom, or I'm going to draw a multiplication grid with x, and this time it's take away 3, so I'm going to write it like -3 and x and +5. Let's do the grid first this time. So in this box here, I've got to do x times x, gives me x squared. In this box here, I've got to do -3 multiplied by x. Now, if you remember back to last time, a negative times a positive gives me a negative, and then 3 times x, 3x. This grid here, +5 multiplied by x gives me +5x. And lastly, in this box here, don't forget I'm multiplying. This is where people give up and tend to add. So +5 multiplied by -3. Positive times negative is a negative. 5 times 3, 15. If you were over here on the lobster claw, then let's do it from the inside out again. So x times x, x squared. This one at the top here, +5 multiplied by x gives me +5x. This one here, -3 multiplied by x, -3x. And then -3 times +5, -15. Okay, because negative times positive makes negative, 5 times 3 makes 15. And again, we've got to do some tidying up. So if you're in the box, you can put all these x terms together. If you're on the lobster claw, you can put all these x terms in the middle together. Either way, it says 5x, +5x, take off 3x. So I think 5 take away 3 is 2. So I would tidy it up to x squared plus 2x minus 15. And if I was doing it in the box, I'd go write that out longhand as well afterwards. Okay, one more, even harder. I thought there were 4, look, so I've left you an extra one, but you're all right, there's only 3. So either I'm going to do the lobster claw, or I'm going to do the box. Notice there's some numbers at the front, so we'll have to be careful this time. What did we do last time? We did that first, so we'll do the lobster claw first this time. So working off the inside of the lobster claw, this says 2x times 4x. So again, just do it like we did last time. Do the 2 times the 4 makes 8. The x times the x makes x squared. Okay, and if you're working off the grid, 2 times 4 makes 8. X times x, x squared. Okay, same bit. Next, if I'm on the lobster claw over here, this is +3 times 2x. So 3 lots of 2x, 3 lots of 2 is 6. So I've got +6x because it's all positive. That's this one over here. That's +6x here. I've ruined my colour coordination. I was trying so hard for you there. Okay, and now I'm going over here. This is -1 multiplied by +4x. So -1 times 4x. Well, negative times positive makes negative, and 1 times 4x, 4x. That's this one over here. It's upsetting me, this pink now. I'm going to make it black. And lastly, I'm on this one. Remember, I'm multiplying, so I need to do -1 times +3. So negative times positive makes negative. 1 times 3, remember, gives me 3. And if I'm over here, it's just going in that box there. Okay. Next up, tidy up the x's in the middle, so either this bit or this bit. Leave the 8x squared, leave the -3, and then in the middle I'm tidying up 6x, take away 4x. Well, I think +6, take away 4, +2. Okay, so on your worksheet you've got a whole load of practice questions. You've got a time limit on those practice questions, so follow the time limit. Don't try and get to the end. Just do as many as you can within that time. Once you've finished, you'll need to restart the video and we'll talk about factorising. Okay, welcome back. So factorising. Factorising just means put back into brackets. So basically, can't talk and write at the same time. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to reverse this process that we did earlier in the starter. So this time I'm going to give you the one without brackets and you're going to work out how to put it back into brackets. So how do we do that? Well, basically what we've got to do is we've got to find something that divides into both of these things. So I need to think of something that goes into 10x that also goes into 35. So there's an x here, but there's no x's here, so that's no good. I can't put that out the front of the brackets. But look at this 10 and this 35. I think you can divide 10 and 35. They're both in the 5 times table, so I reckon I can divide them both by 5. So the first thing I do is put a 5 out the front of the brackets. Now, if you've got a choice, say it could be divided by 2 and by 4, then if you've got a choice, then you put as much as you can out the front of the brackets. Otherwise, you don't get all of the marks. You'll get some of the marks, but you won't have factorised fully. Factorised fully means bring everything out the front that you can. So I think the biggest thing that divides into 10 that also divides into 35 is 5. So I've put that out the front. Now we sort of work backwards and we say, well, 5 times what would have made the 10x? So in my head, I have to work out 5 times what gives me 10x. Well, I think 5 lots of 2x gives me 10x. So I'm going to put 2x in here, because then if I think back to what I did in the starter, when I was multiplying out with that arrow, 5 lots of 2x gives me 10x, and that would give me that first bit. Same deal at the end here. 5 times what gives me 35. So I think 5 times 7 gives me 35. And everything's positive, so I'm just going to match that positive sign in the middle there. So let's look at this one. So 5x, 10y. So I ask myself, what goes into 5x that also goes into 10y? Actually, I think it's 5 again, look, because I can divide this by 5, I can divide this by 5. I can't think of anything else that goes into both of them, so I'm going to put a 5 out the front. That's just a coincidence, it won't always be 5. So again, I say to myself, 5 times what makes 5x? Well, I think 5 times 1x makes 5x, but I'm probably going to try really hard to remember, instead of writing 1x, it's much better if I just wrote x, because like 1x is not as simple as writing x. Then I say to myself, 5 times what gives me 10y? 5 times 2y gives me 10y. And this time I need a minus sign in the middle, because there's a minus sign here and this is positive. Okay, a little bit harder. Let's look at the third one. Not sure whether my mouse is in your way, so I'll move it. Okay, so this one, 4 and 5. I can't think of anything that goes into 4 that also goes into 5. So I'm not going to be able to put a number out the front this time. But look at this. There's an x squared here. Remember that we talked about on the last one just meant x times x. And there's an x here. So both of these terms can be divided by x. So I'm taking one of those x's out the front of the brackets. And then I need to think about what goes in the brackets. So obviously I've got to say x times what makes 4x squared. So I'll obviously need a 4. Trying to write looking at you, it's not working. I'll look at the paper. So that would give me 4x, but I actually want 4x squared. And remember, x squared meant x times x. And I've got one of those x's out the front, but I'll need another one inside my bracket. Okay, so it's not 4 squared. I don't pull the x out and that leaves the squared floating, because that squared doesn't make any sense without the x. So instead I think of it as x times x, and I've put one of them out the front, so I'll need another one in the brackets. At the end here I need to make 5x, so x times what makes 5x? I think x times 5, and I'll need a minus sign in the middle because of that one up there. Okay, even harder. So this has got all sorts in it, and then remember that what I said at the beginning, if you've got a choice, you need to take as much as possible out the front. So I'm going to start by looking at the numbers. I've got a 4 and a 20, so what goes into 4 that also goes into 20? Well, I might think 2, or I might think 4, and what I said at the beginning was, if you've got a choice, take the biggest one. So I could put a 2 out the front, but that wouldn't be as good as if I put the 4 out the front. So I'm going to put a 4 out the front, because that's the biggest thing I can think of that goes into 4 and 20. But I haven't quite finished, because there's all sorts of other things here, and I need to just check whether any of those need to go out the front as well. So look, I've got an x squared. Remember that meant x times x. And I've got an x. So I can certainly put an x out the front, because there's an x in here, because there's 2 of them there, and an x here. And I've got a y here and a y here, so let's put that out the front. But I haven't got any z's in this one, so I can't put any z's out the front because this one doesn't have any. So now I need to think through what needs to go in the brackets. So out the front I've got a 4, an x and a y. But what I'd like to know is, what do I multiply that by to make 4x squared y? Well, I've got the 4. I need x times x, and I've only got one of them, so I need another x. And I've got the y, so I think I'm finished. Now let's look at this bit. I need 20. Well, I've got 4, so 4 times 5 makes 20, so I'm going to put 5 there. I've got the x, I've got the y, but I haven't got this z, so let's put that z in there as well. And I'll need a minus sign because of that. Okay, so you've now got a choice. You've got some questions to do where you get to practice factorising, putting into brackets. So pause the video, have a go for the amount of time we've put on the top of the worksheet, and then restart. Okay, welcome back. This is the trickiest bit of this lesson. Now, if you've done this before, you might just have a way of just sort of doing it, because eventually you can factorise into double brackets with a little bit of practice, and some of you might be able to do it in your heads. So if that's you, feel free to go and just do a whole load from the worksheet if you don't need to listen to me. If, however, you've never done this before, or you've completely forgotten what we did last time, then this bit's for you. So when I get something that looks like this, it has come from 2 separate brackets. And if you think back to what we did when we multiplied out 2 separate brackets and we created something that looks like this x squared here came from that bit, or this bit if you were on the grid, that bit there of the brackets. So if I've got an x squared at the front, it must have come from having an x at the front of each bracket. So the first thing I'm going to do here, because I've got an x squared, is put an x at the front of each bracket. Now if it's got a number at the front in front of that x squared, that makes it even harder, so that's a video for another time. Today I'm just going to concentrate on what if it just says x squared at the beginning. So this x squared must have come from an x and an x at the beginning. Now let's look at this number here, this 6 on this one. This 6 here came from me multiplying these 2 numbers together. So this number at the end came from me multiplying these 2 together. And then the 5 here came from a combination of these 2 things. So this bit plus this bit added on. So when we're trying to factorise, put back into brackets, I know that I need 2 numbers that multiplied to give me positive 2, and they added up to give me the plus 3 here. Okay, so here's my way of always making sure I know what goes in the brackets. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down, and I'm literally going to write it down until I get good at this, a list of all of the pairs of numbers that I can think of that multiply to give me positive 2. So clearly I could have 2 times 1. Okay, but don't forget I could also have negative 2 times negative 1, and I need to write down everything to start with, because then it makes it easier to choose the right pair for this. As I get better at this, I might be able to do this process in my head, but if you need to always write it down, that's always an option. So I've written down everything I can think of that multiplies to give me positive 2, and now I need to select the pair that added up to 3, positive 3, look. Okay, so out of this pair, which pair adds up to positive 3? So I think it's this one, positive 2 and positive 1. So in my bracket, I put positive 2 and positive 1. Okay, so remember, what did I do? I listed everything that multiplied to give me this number, and then I selected the pair that added up to positive 3. Now we're going to do it over here with a negative number, and actually a bigger number, so there's more to choose from. So firstly, 2 brackets, check that that just says x squared, which it does, put an x at the front of each of those. Next up, everything I can think of that multiplies to give me minus 12. So I think there's quite a long list this time. I think I can have minus 1 and 12, can you see that? Just about. Or I can have 1 and minus 12. I can have minus 2 and 6, or 2 and minus 6. I'm concentrating to make sure I don't write the same thing twice. I can have minus 3 and 4, or I can have 3 and minus 4. Okay, so I think that's everything. I think that's all the pairs of numbers that I can think of that multiply to give me minus 12. And it's a bit tedious to write them all out, but it does make the next step easier. So now I need them to add up to, well, I need to just be a bit cautious here. Now, if you remember earlier on, we said if I wrote plus x, it really meant plus 1x, and that might be easier to think of in my head. So I need the pair that adds up to positive 1. So I need to look down my list of numbers and find a pair that adds up to positive 1. So it's going to be one of these two. Negative 3 plus 4 I think is positive 1, whereas 3 and minus 4, that's negative 1. So I don't want that one, I want this one because it adds up to positive 1. And so in one bracket I put a minus 3, and in the other bracket I put positive 4. Okay, let's go again. 2 more to do, look, and then it's your turn. So x squared, x, x. We should be getting good at that bit. Now, positive 15, everything I can think of that multiplies to give me positive 15. So 1 and 15, and minus 1 and minus 15, 3 and 5, and minus 3 and minus 5. You might need that table that we did earlier of positive times negative equals negative, and all of those things might be easier to have that to hand. I think that's everything. So now I need the pair that adds up to negative 8. So which of these pairs adds up to negative 8? Not that one, not that one. That makes positive 8, so that's almost, but not quite. Whereas negative 3 plus negative 5, that makes negative 8. So that's the pair I want. So I'm going to put minus 3 and minus 5. Last one. X, because it's x squared, 2 sets of brackets. Next up, list off everything I can think of that multiplies to give me minus 20. That's quite a lot, so let's go. Minus 1 and 20, and 1 and minus 20, minus 2 and 10, 2 and minus 10, minus 4 and 5, 4 and minus 5. So I think that is my list of everything I can think of. And now I need to find the pair that adds up to minus 8. Well, not that one, and not that one. Minus 2 plus 10 is positive 8, so close, but not quite. Whereas 2 take away 10 is minus 8, so I think it's that pair. And so in this bracket, I'm going to put positive 2, and in this bracket, I'm going to put negative 10. Okay, we've given you a whole list to have a go at. Pause the video. In fact, that's the end of this video. So stop the video here and go and have a go at the last section.